This is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander. Thank you for tuning in to another week. We made it to the end of the regular season, kids. It is week 18 of your NFL picks. As always, I'm joined by my guy, Mr. Matt Russell, who has helped me and guided me throughout this entire regular season. And as we get to the very end here, as we get to the finish line, my friend, I just feel the need to let you know that where we stand, or where I stand right now, after last week, we went 10-6.
Okay.
There's some interesting games within there because that's just,
of course.
Yeah, I mean, football. And for the season, 129, 120-7. I'm going to be very honest with you right now. I am extremely rattled about this because week 18 is week 18. Yeah. And who the bleep knows what's going on in week 18. But that's why you're here, my friend, to break it all down for me and the viewers as well, because the way that I kind of want to go about this is kind of go through the games in terms of this game matters for both teams. This game matters for one team.
Yeah.
And then just kind of go through the games that way. So you'll see a lot of times where I'm on the favorites, but I'm just like, I think this matters for these guys. Tell me why the other team's trying.
Right.
This is insanity. But how are you doing? As you've also made it to the end of the regular season, and also, you know, bowl season is a thing that's still going in right now. How are you?
Yeah, I'm like, what's the Wolf of Wall Street when DiCaprio's like on the Quaaludes, I think, and he's like crawling out of the car. Like that's just me right now. If you can't hear it in my voice, I would have when you had your intro there, I would have normally in normal conditions, I might have belted out some End of the Road by Boys II Men. But I think, again, if you can hear my voice, and maybe that wasn't necessarily going to be a great idea.
Could have been the deep voice guy.
How RIP to that guy. I think he's the one who's passed. No, like that would never be a good idea, even at the best of times. So I'll pretend to use my voice as an excuse as to why. I love week 18, man. Like I love it. Like this is week 18 is for those of us, you might say nerds, who, you know, break this stuff down. Like, you know, we talk about ratings here, you know, throughout the season, but, you know, a couple, 2, 3, 4 times when it comes to games, like this is where you bust that out, and you have to try to you know, when you were talking about valuations, right, where all these teams have a value on a week-to-week basis, and all of these teams have a week 18 value, and the week 18 value is often quite different than their weeks 1 through 17 value. And so, yeah, like I'll be writing my NFL stuff for The Score this week, and week 18 is such a different animal that the two articles that I'm going to write are essentially, one of them is going to be the fake games, and one of them is going to be the real games, right? Like the fake games being the ones that you mentioned, where it's just like, this is a glorified exhibition for one reason or another. And then there's the ones where it's like, okay, this game matters to, like you said, at very least one team. And oftentimes, as a general rule that we'll sort of start out with here, is when a game matters to one team in the NFL, the way that the NFL works and competition, et cetera, is that often means that the game is going to matter on the field to the other team, right? You call it, everybody likes to use the term spoiler, right? You're going to play spoiler. And that's fair. Like you can label it that, but at the end of the day, it's just being a competitive professional athlete, right? And so, you know, we saw that last year. You know, one of the great betting opportunities, if you will, last year was backing Detroit getting up over a field goal in the final game of the season, that Sunday nighter in week 18 against the Packers, because the Packers needed that game and Detroit, quote unquote, didn't. And so the line got pushed from what it normally would have been under a field goal to over a field goal. The Lions went and won outright. So, you know, anybody brave enough to grab the money line, you know, cashed more than they should have, right? A higher money line than they should have. And that's just the thing that's going to set up here, you know, a lot of these games where it's the other team is going to care in the moment that they care, right? Organizationally, that'll always be a little bit different, right? Who starts, who sits, et cetera, but the guys on the field are going to care, especially if the other team really, really cares. And by the way, them really, really caring is going to create a lot of value in fading them as well. So I'm excited, man. I know I like this week a lot more than you do, but I think normally by the time we're done talking about it, we end up being pretty profitable in week 18s over the last, 4 years now.
Yeah. And that is the goal, right? That is the goal. So we get started No Thursday games this week, but we start on Saturday. And on Saturday, we got the Steelers as 3.5-point favorites against the Baltimore Ravens. And again, talking about games that matter, here we are. Massive game for the Steelers as they need this win for the playoffs. The Ravens, not so much. Fits right into what you were just talking about. The Ravens don't need this game because Lamar Jackson not playing in this game. A lot of their starters also probably won't be playing in this game. 3.5-point spread here and a Mike Tomlin special here. I feel like I got to start on the Steelers and the 3.5 points, but I'm going to ask you this question though. The Ravens like backups, they're still like, as you just said, they're still going to care about this game, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is still Steelers Ravens, right? And so, interestingly, I think, if you're dying, well, I shouldn't say if you're dying too, because you're obviously on the Steelers, but we're going to try to talk you out of that here. Spoiler alert. This number's up to 4 in most places because it's funny, right? When the lines sort of populate on Sunday night. I was sitting with a friend of mine on Sunday night watching these games, and we're like, okay, let's try to guess some of these lines. And you just kind of do like 1 or 2 sentences on sort of your speculation on what you think you're going to get from a roster perspective. And so this line was like, we're sort of like, I don't know, like Baltimore -2.5. And part of the exercise is like, I tell them like, okay, this is what the number should have been if all things were equal. And so my stuff this week, every game is going to have a if all things were equal line. Mm-hmm. And if all things were equal, like, what do you think the line would be? Like, isn't it pretty much, think about it this way, right? Like Baltimore at home against pretty good teams, Cleveland, Detroit, LA, have been 7-point, essentially around a full touchdown, a favorite. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's a stretch, again, just based on those comparisons or based on sort of the formula that I use to create these, projections. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Ravens would be about -10 against Mason Rudolph and the Steelers, at home, if all things were equal. Mm-hmm. So, when we sort of guess, we're coming off of -10, we're going like, how low can you go with this? And it's like, I don't know, like 2.5, where like, it's still kind of a pick 'em here, but like, I think you have to lean to the Ravens because as much as Lamar Jackson is ruled out for this game, it's, everybody knew that was going to happen because it wouldn't make any sense for him to play. Mm-hmm. And so there's sort of a reaction even further beyond the 3.5, right? Where it's like, oh, Lamar's out. Like, now we know he's out. Let's move this thing up a tick to -4. But this was already way beyond where it, probably could have been or should have been anyway. And so when you talk about their backups, right? I mean, obviously everybody, the first one you think about is Tyler Huntley, who has obviously played a ton, was in a playoff game last year. And you use the term loosely, but led the Ravens to a playoff game.
Pro Bowler last year?
Well, I mean, enough people had to die for him to make the Pro Bowl. No, I mean, he did make the Pro Bowl, but you know what I mean? Like, it is funny. Like, it is, he had to be around. He had to be available.
He had to do some stuff.
He had to participate in the regular season and be willing. So it's like, okay, he's not going to start. And okay, obviously you have some veterans on the team who aren't going to play. But like, I think sometimes we forget the NFL rosters are only so big. Like, they only have so many guys. Like, you can't just be like all 22 starters. Like, take it easy, right? And then also some of the times, like, even though, okay, like a veteran like an Odell Beckham might sit, the drop off from Odell Beckham to a guy who maybe doesn't play all that much, isn't necessarily all that big. And, as we've seen from, you'd say Mark Andrews, right? Like, remember, he got hurt and it was like, oh man, like, what are they going to do? And it's like, well, then Isaiah Likely comes in and like puts up Mark Andrews-esque type numbers. And no one's saying that he's necessarily better or as good as Mark Andrews, but like, you fit in a role, you catch the ball, which, listen, some teams have a harder, a task of doing that than others. And it's like, the Ravens aren't really, really good because they have like 5 good players. They're really, really good because they're a deep, like, well-run organization, right? Who can pull guys off of a practice squad to a point where, like, Keaton Mitchell obviously not going to play, but like, he's an example of a guy who's like, yeah, he's our 3rd string running back. And it's like, yeah, he's actually the fastest guy alive. Like, he's, we're actually going to give him a couple of carries late and it's like 80-yard touchdown. You're like, oh, okay, that's what you've got holstered in your back pocket. And so, fundamentally from a line perspective, I just go back and I look and I go, okay, is this Ravens team that much different with Tyler Huntley than the Tyler Huntley team of last year when Lamar was out? And what did we have them rated at, right? So I went back to last year's ratings. And, the Ravens right now being what they are like a 75 out of 100 right now. And that honestly might still be a little bit low because they just keep covering these numbers, right? It's kind of like the 49ers earlier in the season, right? We're like, how high can we go? And we blew the 49ers right through like the 80 mark, right? And so like maybe the Ravens are closer to an 80. But last season we had them rated with Huntley as a team in the low 40s. I went back and I looked and it said 41. And I was like, okay, if we just said that the Ravens, who are obviously vastly improved from last season beyond the quarterback position, if we went back and we just said, okay, the Ravens are going to drop because of Tyler Huntley and a couple of other, veterans getting, a week off, we're going to bump them from like pretty close to an 80 down to a 41. One, that's a massive drop. Two, even that drop only gets you to Baltimore -1 in this game because the Steelers rating, by the way, hasn't even cracked 40. Right? Like they were well below 40 when Mason Rudolph wasn't the quarterback. Rudolph comes in, they win a couple games, they cover a couple numbers. So now maybe they're up into the 40s, right? Like we have to add in a boost, for the Steelers here a little bit. And so like the Ravens, I think sometimes because the Steelers win a couple games, you go like, well, they can just win on command just because they need it. It's like they needed it against the Cardinals, they needed it against the Patriots. And, we heaped a lot of blame on Mitch Trubisky for that. And certainly I think that was warranted. But like if you move the Steelers up to the low 40s and you move the Ravens down to the low 40s, both of which I think are pretty aggressive moves on either side, right? It's pretty, that's a high move for the Steelers, and that's obviously a massively low move for the Ravens. You get to both teams being in the low 40s, which equals about a pick 'em. You give the Ravens a point for home field advantage, and that's how you get to essentially pick 'em -1, et cetera, right? So the idea that the Steelers here being now 4-point favorites, add on that a 1.5 that the Ravens are getting for home field advantage, you're telling me that this version of the Ravens is 5.5 points worse than the Steelers right now because they beat like the Bengals at home and like they went on the road and beat a Seahawks team that like honestly struggled the week before with Tennessee. Like this line is like, you want to talk about inflation, and anybody can sort of just walk in and say week 18 is inflated for the team that needs to win. Like that's a pretty good sort of blanket to throw across a lot of these games where one team needs it, one team doesn't. Like that's the breakdown right there. I just did the math for you, right? I just spelled it out, like what kind of thing we're talking about here. And so we're talking about a game that should be a pick 'em, and one team is favored by 4 points. Like, well, give me the underdog in that circumstance, right? Now, there's an added twist where, like, if you have Steelers to make the playoffs futures, and that was a plus money price before the season, and you're sitting there with a ticket that's, plus 125 on the Steelers, and all they need to do is win this game to make the playoffs, essentially. I don't mind you just sitting there going, yeah, like, I hope the Steelers, win this game. But that ticket also provides you an opportunity to take a free shot with the Ravens at +4, or even come over the top, right? Let's do some quick math, right? You bet $100 on the Steelers to make the playoffs. If they win this game, you win $125 because the odds were plus 125. If you decide to put $200 on the Ravens here, the most you can lose is $75, right? The most you can win is you can literally win both bets if the Steelers happen to win this game by 1, 2, 3, or if it's a push, right? You still win a little bit. You obviously win your Steelers money and you push off of the Ravens, right? So there's a bunch of different ways to play this, but any way you look at it, whether it's, it's not a hedge, right? It's a middle opportunity, a small middle opportunity, or if you just have nothing on it, you're seeing like a pretty massive discrepancy here in where the number probably should be. This is Ravens all day on Saturday for me here at anything bigger than a field goal. And honestly, even a flat field goal, if that were the case. But, honestly, there's +4s. And as I mentioned, right, like if you're going to switch your pick, which I see you doing out there, let's get the good stuff here. Let's get the +4 just in case here, because, this, looking at your record, right, it's like we can get to like profitability here. And a lot of those pushes, as we've talked about on the show, were wins in real life that had to be graded as pushes. Let's put Baltimore +4 there on the board just in case it happens to land exactly on 4.
Yes, that is the move for sure. As you mentioned, the pick has been changed, and it's a thing where looking at it at this point, and the Baltimore Ravens, I feel like they're a team too that, I know this is going to sound stupid, but like the camaraderie of the squad, right? Like that's a squad that
we talk organizational all the time, right?
Them like woofing it up on the sidelines, all like fired up and shit. Like that's going to be awesome.
And we have bet the Steelers +3 in this matchup in scenarios where it was like nobody wanted the Steelers, right? On the premise, and I think this was literally the case earlier this season, on the premise that it's like these two teams just play each other close. And like there's very few sort of matchups in the league where you can just blindly sort of have faith in that. Because the coaching changes of all of the other teams like make it so that like you don't have a history the same way that Harbaugh and Tomlin have a history, right? And so like just as much as it was sort of like awkward to bet Pittsburgh plus 3.5, I think it was at home earlier in the season when they ended up winning outright, it can feel just as awkward in this case to bet the Ravens, but the premise is still the same. Like quote unquote, these two teams, no love lost, right? Like these two teams do not like each other, et cetera, right? Like the Ravens, the guys who are going to be on the field, who are pretty good football players as well, are going to want to win this game. Like this isn't like, oh, let's just not sort of try in the second half. The guys who are going to be out there are good players. They're going to try. Like I said, competitiveness is the thing here. And the Ravens have a bye next week. It's not like they need to get sort of immediately healthy. Like I understand why you would never put, certain guys at risk, right? But like, not everybody is going to sit in this game, and because you can't, there's just not, you don't literally have enough human beings to have 25 guys sit,
Yeah, no, for sure. So as we keep going here on to Saturday's game, we got the Texans at the Colts. Both teams super banged up, both teams at 9-7. This is essentially a win and you're in type scenario here for these squads. And so this is one that, as you said in your intro, talking about where the ratings are at the end of the season, because that's what's going to dictate what we think the line is. And my thought is, I don't know this, but my thought is the Texans. And the reason I'm on the Texans because I just think they're the better team, but I also think that, the injuries piling up, I feel like once Stroud came back, it's like, okay, this looks a lot better here. I feel a lot more comfortable taking the Texans in this game.
I think so. Well, let's talk about the line first, right? This one being both teams need it, and this is the type of game that validates the conversations that we have about the games where the line is off. Mm-hmm. This is basically bang on, right? Mm-hmm. Like these are the teams, right? These are the teams. This is their rating, roughly about the same. You give 1.5 to 2 points. You wouldn't give a full 2 points for the Colts, but give 1.75 to be completely specific for the Colts having home field advantage. And I think most people think the Texans are probably a little bit better. That probably stems from the idea that pick your choose your weapon here, CJ Stroud or Gardner Minshew. Well, CJ Stroud, we don't have the CJ Stroud, scar tissue, if you will, right?
Exactly.
That's the good thing about being the rookie, right? Like we just assume CJ Stroud is the guy. And, I don't even disagree with that. This isn't me setting it up being like, oh, the line is way off. And because everybody loves CJ Stroud. I think CJ Stroud and the Texans are going to be the popular choice. This line is actually flipped. And again, modest of all flips, right? You go from -1 Colts to -1 Texans, which means on the money line, you go from -120 on one side to -120 on the other side. It's not the biggest, move. It's like 5% sort of cumulative move. So this is one of the games where it's like, all right, like who would you just rather roll with? And I think a lot of people would just rather roll with CJ Stroud. I have some Houston Texans mid-season, to win the division futures that, were pretty long shots way back when. And because the Jags have kind of collapsed here, I'm hoping those still have some life. And I'll, if the Texans can win this game, and even if they don't for other reasons, I'm going to be locked in and keeping my fingers crossed that the Titans can pull one last upset on Saturday. But I'm already sort of started. I have a starting position already on the Texans is my point, right? So I don't come at this, and I always want to be honest with people, especially on this podcast, because it's our chance to actually have a discussion about these games versus just writing down on paper, which side you like, which side you don't like. I'm influenced by the fact that I'm already deep in, not should say deep in on the Texans, but I already have a Texans ticket. Yeah. Right. And so I'll probably add to that. I'll probably have a, regular, just, run of the mill bet here on the Texans. It's, obviously a very sort of fun game, a game that I don't think we've had CJ Stroud in prime time yet this season. If I'm not mistaken, I don't
think so.
Memory. And I'm finding that hard to believe because I think isn't every team supposed to get a primetime game?
I feel like he might have been hurt during their Thursday nighter, maybe. Or does everyone get a Thursday nighter? No, that changed.
No, that didn't change. Anyway, maybe somebody's out there, Texans fan out there is probably like, no, we played on a Sunday nighter in week 4. Yeah, at any point, at any rate, like, yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like, I like the Texans a little bit more. We're getting essentially a pick 'em price here, whether it's -1, +1, whatever you want to do it, right? Probably not going to matter in the end. So yeah, like if you had to pick a side here, I think most people are going to pick the Texans side, which is a little bit sort of unnerving, but it hasn't yet created a ton of value necessarily going from -1 on one side to -1 on the other.
No, I hear you. And while we're here, I feel like we might as well just switch gears and go to the Jags and the Titans. Jags 5-point favorites on the road. And of course, Jags just need to win this game. They win the division. Yeah. Seems pretty simple, right? Except for the fact that we're talking about the Jags, because nothing's ever that simple with the Jags. And also, we never really know what your man's Vrabel's up to with the Titans, right? Yep. We just don't know. I'm sitting here, as I said, in a lot of these games where it's going to be this team needs to win and there's stakes. I'm going to start there and need to be talked out of it. So Jags -5, give me that right now. But what do you got, man?
Well, so as I mentioned, right? So not only do I have the Texans, I also have a Jags to miss the playoffs at 25-1 from basically the point where they lost to the Bengals, right? And it was like at the time that loss to the Bengals on Monday night was, like silly Jags, like tripped over yourselves there. Yeah. Trevor Lawrence got hurt, didn't finish the game. Oh, but like he's, somehow because he's Wolverine, he's going to be fine, et cetera, et cetera. I saw that game as like a much larger indictment of the Jags as a whole. Like that game never really should have gotten to a point where they were in panic mode and that Trevor Lawrence was getting hurt because he was dropping back to pass in the fourth quarter. And so I was like, yeah, okay, like you're going to give me 25-1 that this goes south. Like teams lose their last 3 or 4 games or 4 of their last 5 or whatever it was. And they do that all the time. So I'm like, it's 25-1, right? And at 25-1, you do the math, right? You can throw $20, you can throw $50 on something. And that price, that payout gets pretty high pretty quick. So I'm sitting there with this ticket now. And the thing is, because the Jags are tied in to a Texans division bet and like the Bills to make or miss the playoffs and like all of this other stuff, right? It isn't as clean as from a betting perspective as, man, you're sitting there with a 25-1 ticket. The Jags are minus, 230 to win this game. Like that's an easy hedge middle. I shouldn't say middle, but like a hedge, or you can come over the top of that or do whatever, right? So I look at the number and I go, okay, like, are we getting any value one way or another, right? Because as you mentioned, right, like one team needs it, the other team doesn't. The funny thing is here, the projection for this point spread is like Jags -5. And it's like, yeah, that's the number. So it's not that there is some sort of huge thing here. It's like, oh man, the Jags need this win. I don't know if it's like the respect of Vrabel and the Titans and the concept of the division and all of that sort of thing. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But unlike some of these other games where the team who needs it is getting a bump, the Jags aren't really getting a bump here. So which is good for those of us who are looking to sort of maybe kind of middle out here or sort of guarantee profit is the term I should be using. We're actually getting like a reasonable price here on the Jags. Because what I was worried about is be like Jags -7.5 and like money line of -350 or -400 or something. You're like, oh, come on, you're just like working me over here. So honestly, it's going to come down really to like what Houston does and a little bit of what Pittsburgh does, because both of those games tangentially involve the Jags here.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's like, okay, how much, it'll decide how much it's worth for me, for the Jags to lose this game if the things sort of fall where they may. And I realize that doesn't really help a lot of people who are sitting there going like, yeah, but who do we pick? Who do we pick, man? All I can tell you is I'm going to be hoping the Titans win. And, if you want to join me, like +5 is a bet. I don't know if it's the bet. But I also wouldn't, beat you up if you were like Jags -5 here. They showed me something last week against Carolina. I don't know. I think that was more about Carolina than it was Jacksonville. Like Carolina, I think is just, god awful, especially away from home. The Carolina got their win. There's a lot of ways that Packers game from 2 weeks ago ends up as just a flat out blowout. Carolina is not to be trusted. So, and 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 we bet Carolina last week, but like, why did we bet Carolina? Because the number was 6.5 and it looked like Trevor Lawrence wasn't going to play, which means we could get a plus 6.5 and that line's going to drop. And guess what happened? Well, that line dropped to like 3.5. I think got as low as 3.5. Right. So we made a bet at plus 6.5 on Carolina last week that closed 3.5. Well, however you feel about either team, that's just a good bet. Just fundamentally, structurally, that's a good bet. We got value for our bet. Wasn't great when Carolina came out and could not move the ball on offense whatsoever, right? But sometimes you're going to lose that. Like if you've been betting bowl season this entire time, you probably had a lot of good bets that you made early on and saw, oh man, this line moved 3-4 points my direction, sometimes even more than that. And it didn't matter because the original team that was favored by an original amount or the original underdog or whatever ended up, the first bet was probably the wrong bet. That was the case last week with Jacksonville and Carolina, but I think it had more to do with Carolina. So like, I wouldn't why would you trust Jacksonville here just because they need it, right? They've needed it for a month and a half now, right? Yeah. So like, I think this is one where, Ryan Tannehill came out with some quotes, and like, between him, Derrick Henry, like this is the last ride for, however you feel about this Titans team and their, up and down sort of nature over the last 5 years. It's a team that won a division and was a 1 seed like 3 years ago. I'm not saying like they're good because of that. I'm just saying like there's a bond there with this team. Mm-hmm. So, and they looked bad last week. And honestly, that's usually a sign that you want to grab the team the next week, right? And I think if you just backed a team that, there's always, everybody puts up the stats, like team that got blown out, how they do against the spread the next week, like it's usually really good. I just kind of look at it and go like, man, if a team didn't cover last week in the NFL, they're probably a good bet to cover. And that's, that could be by a half point or by 40 points or whatever. And I think the Titans are just kind of that team.
Yeah, no, for sure. Totally makes sense. Let's keep it going. We got a really good big time game here with the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. Skipping ahead to the Sunday night game. And I know that Sunday night, that's how we're rounding out the NFL schedule. But in terms of the pod and the games that matter, we can't save this one to the end. No. Bills, Dolphins, Bills favored by 3. Dolphins are super banged up. We've been talking about the Buffalo Bills, but they're in a weird scenario where they could win and win the division, or they could lose and be out of the playoffs. That is just weird and a strange scenario to be in. Yeah. But that also puts it in a very interesting place where as a bettor, and you're trying to figure out here, you got one team that really needs it, the other team that kind of does, but at the same time is super banged up and is probably just trying to like get by without getting more injuries. Give me the Buffalo Bills -3.
Yeah. So it's 2 seed or out are the two are like, and it's like, there's kind of no in between. Right. And, I shouldn't say there's no in between because obviously they can win the wild card. And that I think is part of what needs to be involved in this handicap, or at least as far as the timing is concerned with this bet. Because we start from a rating perspective, right? Dolphins come off a game where they, regardless of what happened in the game, they were just 3 to 3.5 point underdogs at Baltimore. And now they come home and they're 3 to 3.5 point underdogs here, or just flat 3 underdogs at home to Buffalo. So like, obviously, that's a pretty significant adjustment to the Dolphins rating. The Bills rating has gotten, honestly, it's kind of peaked out, right? Like we had them as a 12-point road favorite against the Chargers, 2 weeks ago. And then last week, 13 against New England, right? There are no discounts on the Buffalo Bills. We have, based on this stretch that they've had here, we have bumped them back to like prime peak Bills of basically the last, the Josh Allen era, if you will. And now, and so I don't think we can move them up any further to get to -3. So what this number is a downgrade on the Dolphins. And so you go, okay, like how much of a downgrade? If we had them around, about a 70 type of a team, getting to this number, you got to take them all the way down to basically like 60 to 61, right? And so you go, okay, well, potentially, Jalen Waddle, and potentially, obviously they lost Bradley Chubb. That was brutal. Again, another situation where coaches are leaving their starters in games far too late and risking them getting hurt. And then, went and it got the Dolphins. So to get them down to, Dolphins 61 here, and then you got the Bills sort of where they a super high rating, and a rating to the point where they didn't cover these last two games, right? So it might be too high of a rating. And if you watch the Bills offense last week against the Patriots, it was pretty gross, right? Like they scored, but they scored because Bailey Zappi was turning the ball over at an alarming rate in the first half. And they still probably could have covered that number, but that would have been more of a New England thing and a Bailey Zappi thing than the Bills necessarily showing anything too great. But the key here is, like, what if the Bills have clinched at least a playoff spot, right? And so because this game is a Sunday night, and that's what I talked about the timing for a bet on this game, is we could get to a point here where it's like it is just, and listen, winning the division, getting, home field, way better than going on the road next week. I'm not minimizing that at all. Is there or could there be an element of relief if, for example, the Titans win, the Jags lose? Is there an element of relief for like knowing that we made the playoffs? If you're the
for sure,
right? And like, and how does that sort of change your mindset, even so ever so slightly, going into that game with the Dolphins? Where like, yes, it's still for the division. Yes, that's why it's on Sunday night, because it's foolproof as far as like being an important game. But like, yeah, like if you're betting on the Bills here at a number that we're having a hard time kind of getting to, it needs to have, I think, a little more desperation, and the desperation that comes with potentially just not even, making the playoffs. So I think you have to wait. Now, the problem is, or sort of the delicate part is if you wait, then, and the Bills are guaranteed, find themselves, like, teams lose that need to lose, and they're in the playoffs no matter what, the line could come down and you're no longer getting, and I'm sorry, like, listen, my lean is obviously to the Dolphins here at +3, right? And if you really like the Bills and you don't care necessarily about like them potentially having like the slightest kind of exhale, you could probably get a better number. Like it'll probably come off of 3 if the Bills don't need this to like make the playoffs. They just need it for the division. So if you like the Bills, I think you wait here to try to get a better number than 3. I can't imagine it going higher than 3. Like, I mean, what would happen? I mean, I guess Tyreek would have to not play or, something like that. But like, we're already so kind of like mega downgrading here the Dolphins to the point where, yeah, like I think if you like the Bills, you wait and you see if you can get -2.5. I think if you like the Dolphins, this is probably the highest point in the market, and at +3, I think that's the move you got to make. So, again, it is an easier conversation to have at 7:45 on Sunday than it is, on Thursday morning.
Yeah, no, totally. That's the tough part about all of this for sure. Buffalo Bills, I guess I'm riding with the Mafia this week. As we keep it going, though, we head to the Dallas Cowboys on the road in Washington, taking on the Commanders. And speaking of games that matter to one team, I feel like the game matters to both teams, just in different ways.
Okay.
If you're the Commanders,
I'm wildly excited to find out how this matters to the Commanders in one way or the other.
Just lose, no? Like, aren't they trying to lose and like?
Yeah, I mean, they don't need the help, right?
They don't need to try, but I mean,
yeah.
it matters, right? Like they're gonna lose. Cowboys favored by 13 points in this game. Cowboys got to win their division, and isn't this just what the Cowboys do? No, dummy this team when they need to win.
Okay,
by 13. No,
it's funny. You could have said, like, when you said that, I was waiting for you to be like, don't they choke in week 18 against a team like Washington? I'd be like, yeah, they do. So yeah, there's a couple of different like this is what the Cowboys do, type of scenarios. Again, this is one where it's like it's pretty simple for me. I'm not going to bet on this game. I have Dallas, to win the division, a ticket that I thought died long ago. I shouldn't say long ago because obviously they were tied with the Eagles. But I thought, when they lost those back-to-back games to Buffalo and Miami, I'm like, I really think I needed one of those two for Dallas to win. And this is a preseason division ticket that was written about over at the Score. And so it's like, and honestly, I forgot that the Eagles just had to lose a game of their last two because it's like, you got a home game against the Cardinals and then you got the Giants. Like, you're not going to lose one of those two games. And obviously the Cowboys game against the Lions going into that game, and obviously during that game, was no bargain either. And so I kind of forgot that, like, the idea that that ticket was even alive. And so I watched the whole Eagles Cardinals game. I had Cardinals plus, 11, right? But that was never really in doubt. And I had a couple of Cardinals anytime touchdowns, super long shots that I was hoping were going to come through. Greg Dortch getting tackled on like the 5-yard line was a bit painful. But I never occurred to me that, like, with a win by the Cardinals, that like the 49ers get the 1 seed for sure, but that the Cowboys all of a sudden just need to win, and they win this like plus 250, type ticket. So now, again, it's still a long way for me to say like that I'm good, right? Could the Cowboys lose this game? Absolutely. There's a couple of different ones here where it's like, speaking of like the Steelers, and I'm already kind of predicting it, not that they'll lose necessarily, but that it's possible, where it's like you have a really good price on a ticket that all we need here is the favorite to win. And that favorite is, it's week 18. That favorite is probably not going to win. We're at a point here with this number at 13. Like, I'm pretty confident the Cowboys are going to win the game. I will say this, right? We talked about the projections, what the number should be. If all things were equal number, road game, Dallas at Washington, number should be about 10. Yeah. So you go, okay, like Commanders obviously losing a very similar game and not covering in a similar game last week to the 49ers. It's going to bump them up a little bit. Bump them down, I guess you'd say, bump the line up a little bit. I don't know how you bump the Cowboys up high necessarily, because, they probably should have lost that game last week. So I think there's, 2.5 points, let's say, of value here in Washington at plus 13. Am I like, yeah, let's try to get a middle out of this. Let's try, let's have 2 bets in this game, essentially Cowboys to win and Washington plus 13. No, I'm good with my Cowboys just to win this game. There's more games at 4:00 in the 4:30 window than there are in the 1:00 window this week. So it's not like the Cowboys Commanders are, have to be on a screen if you've got, a 4 or 5 screen setup. And I'm hoping we can kind of not pay attention to that game whatsoever, get an early touchdown from Dallas, and never have to flip my, flip any screen over to that game, because hopefully that's an easy one for us.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of that game, we'll go right from there, as I'm going from being on the Cowboys to being on the Eagles. And the Eagles are in a scenario where obviously they win. They need the Cowboys to lose. They could get the division. They're going against the Giants, frisky Giants, Tyrod Taylor Giants. Yeah. Very interesting one here. And as mentioned, right, starting out on the Eagles, but I mean, the Eagles, there's a scenario where the Dallas Cowboys are up big.
Yeah.
And then the Eagles are like, all right, let's just pull our guys.
Yeah.
And then Tyrod's out here just balling.
Yeah.
Right. So
they might flip the screen, right? They might flip screen or never watch the Cowboys game after the first quarter, right? It might be that situation.
Yeah. So is this one here, like, the lean is the Eagles, but at the same time, this line is put primely at 5 for a reason, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty big. Well, let's put it this way, right? All things were equal number. What would all things be equal number? We just saw this matchup 2 weeks ago, right? And it was Philly minus 13 at home. We know it's about 1.5, 1.75, maybe 2 points because it's Philadelphia. But honestly, it's not going to be 2 points for New York. New York has barely any home field advantage. So there's probably just over a 3-point shift in home field, right? So let's say 2 for Philadelphia, 1 for New York, just using flat numbers. Well, that gets you to 10, right, in New York. So this number is 5. So the number should be 10. It opens 7, right? And so conceptually, there's a couple of scenarios where, like, no matter what the situation is, the numbers bettors will see a number that is shorter than where they think it should be, and they're just going to blindly bet it. So actually, I think that's kind of the case for the national championship game, because, not to divert, into the college ranks, right? But like Michigan should be a bigger favorite than 4.5 based on previous point spreads. So if you open 4, you're probably going to see people bet on Michigan because they think it should be 6. That doesn't take into account Washington being wildly underrated all season long, and honestly, a team that plays close games all the time. So the funny thing is like that wasn't the case when this was Philadelphia minus 7. People weren't like, oh, it should be 10 and bet minus 7. People were like, oh, it's -7. Like, I'll take +7 with the Giants because of the reason that you said, where it's like, what are we going to get late in this game? And so these two games, in this game especially, because this is the game that's going to be sort of eyeballing this game. And honestly, this game should be a 1:00 game. They screwed up by putting this game at the same time as the Cowboys game. But this is the live betting Week 18 game, right? And it's funny that it's taken us this long to get to a game that has sort of live betting potential. But I think the pregame number, or the pregame bet for all of this isn't it just Giants money line?
Mm-hmm.
Because like 5, like you said, Vegas zone, like it's in between. It doesn't seem to really know where it's going. I would say like the value is on the Eagles because of, as we mentioned, right? Number should be 10. It's been dropped down to 7. And at the moment, again, like in this very moment, the Eagles are trying.
Yeah.
That could change.
Yep.
And honestly, at -5, isn't the value of the Eagles at the start of the game?
Mm-hmm.
So shouldn't we be looking for a first half point spread?
I like it.
The Eagles, right? Because if the whole number is going to be depressed, right? Whether it's 10, 7, 5, like we're getting the low point on the Eagles, and usually these things are based off of the full game point spread. It'll be interesting, and I'm looking right now to see, like, if any, Thursday morning, if anybody has put up a first half line for this game. Now, listen, odds makers, sports books, they're pretty sharp, right? Like, oh, here we go. First half lines two ways. There it is up. Eagles are -3 in the first half.
Yeah.
And that's pretty close to tied to -5, right? Like if a full, halvesies would be -2.5. -3 first half is a far better bet as far as like taking the Eagles to do anything in this game than -5 for the full game. Because the Eagles could take a 10, 14, 17-point lead in this game, go into halftime, see that the Cowboys are up 20 points, and be like, oh, bleep it. Everybody sits. And now you're left with Marcus Mariota and honestly a bad defense. And by the way, like, if this game was -7, if this game was -10, I'd be still interested in the Giants money line.
For sure.
Because the Eagles defense is dreadful. And Tyrod Taylor doesn't turn the ball over. So, like,
wait, you mean Matt Patricia didn't fix it?
He didn't fix it. Believe it or not, Yemans did not fix it. He's going to need a new pencil. He's broken a bunch of them. And yeah, he has not fixed it. And so the problem here is like money line that would have been +250, 300, something along those lines. At the moment is like less than +200. So like if you're doing a money line round robin underdog parlay, like the Giants need to be included in that. But from a strict value perspective, the Eagles are the valuable side. We just don't want to have to deal with them in the second half. Ipso facto, let's take the Eagles -3 in the first half of this game, expecting them to kind of come out with their best effort. Now, don't go nuts on that, because as I said, kind of like the Giants conceptually in this game, because I can't essentially with the Eagles defense being what it is. They are probably going to be on the fade list, presumably going to Tampa Bay in the first round of the playoffs, because again, they cannot stop anyone. And, honestly, I think they're going to have some trouble with the Buccaneers pass offense.
Speaking of the aforementioned Tampa Bay Bucs, it's almost like you know exactly where I'm going.
And I don't. That's the funny part.
I know.
I think the long-time listeners of this know that I never know what game you're going to next.
We got the Bucs as 4.5-point favorites in Carolina. The Bucs need to win, and if they do, they're in. Imagine that. And the Panthers are, the Panthers. This is an interesting one here, though, because last week the Bucs, in a scenario where they could have just made things easy for themselves, they get their teeth kicked in somehow to the Saints, setting up this scenario. But now they have to go in against the Panthers. And while the Panthers aren't good, as you mentioned earlier, they do play better at home for some reason, right? This line is set at 4.5, primarily in the Vegas zone. Again, I'm on the Bucs because they need this game, but the Panthers are still going to be out here trying, right? So, what do you make of this line here? I'm on the Bucs. That's my starting point.
Listen, everybody, go back. First episode of the season. Go back and talk about our preview.
This is true.
Buccaneers, right? Plus 800. Read the stuff about the score. Plus 800 is the only. I'm pretty sure, you know what? The Packers, I guess, weren't the second choice in the division. But I wrote about every division, who to bet on in every division. Essentially, other than the favorite, right? Because the thing is, with the favorite in the division,
for value.
But there can be value on the favorite. But what the key to that is, though, right, is like this week, because when you bet a favorite to win a division, and because it's the NFL, a lot of times you get to this point in the season, and maybe the best case scenario is like a team needs to win to close out that division. And these are divisional games. A lot of times it's a normal regular game, right? So you're betting a favorite. Now that hasn't really kind of come to fruition necessarily, because like, for example, the Eagles, a favorite, they don't have control over whether they can win the division. 49ers already clinched that division. But like, it'd be really interesting if the 49ers had lost a game or two to the point where they were involved, or still hadn't clinched the division, and they had to play like the Rams straight up, for that. And so like, what if, they were minus 200, it's basically the same price as you would have gotten for them to win their division. So with those minus prices, you need everything to go really well, and you need to win the last game probably at a pretty similar price. With underdogs or sort of second choice, you don't. You just kind of need to get to week 18 and hope they're still alive for it, because even if they're an underdog, you may have a chance. And that's kind of fundamentally like, look at Miami, right? You get a better price on them to win the division than you do have on the money line. Same thing with Dallas, and so on and so forth. Tampa Bay was the only one that I took that was the last choice, right? The fourth choice of them all. And it was pretty simple. It was like, this division stinks. Anybody can win it. Let's just take the biggest price here. Mm-hmm. Problem is, like, this is like set up so well for the Bucs to blow it. Because as you mentioned, right, they looked so bad last week. Now, again, we talked about the idea of like, if the team looks bad last week, they should probably be bet on the following week, and vice versa, especially if they are sort of good enough. And I think the Buccaneers are good enough. So this is an area where like, I'm not going to bet it at minus 4.5, because I wouldn't trust the Bucs to like cover a number on the road, because I have obviously a doomsday element to this. But like, I'm hopeful the Bucs win, because then we cash that plus 800. I have some Saints and Falcons to miss the playoffs type stuff, and it all kind of catches up. So for me, it's going to be like, okay, how much, if at all, are we going to kind of grab maybe some Carolina just to kind of try, go for that middle that we talked about with Pittsburgh and Baltimore, just to kind of play it safe to the point where it's like not all of it goes out the window. But again, we'll see what happens with Atlanta and New Orleans as far as like which one of those teams could possibly come up. But that's happening at the same time. Neither of those, speaking, we'll talk about this game in a second, right? But like, what if Tampa Bay's up 20? Yeah. Atlanta and New Orleans gets a little weirder potentially. What, some of these other games, right? Like, so there's a lot going on in week 18, but at least this one is sort of cut and dry as far as like, I just need Tampa Bay to win. Obviously, after last week, don't really trust them at minus 4.5. That being said, Carolina, I mean, there's a lot of teams who like aren't in it, but are still going to try. We're going to get to a couple of those teams. I'm not positive Carolina isn't just like, yeah, I'm pretty much done with this season. Because the coach, the guy who's the coach, Tabor or whatever his name is, like, this isn't the first year of like a 5-year deal for him. This isn't like we're building something. This is like, this thing is crumbling around us. The owner's throwing drinks on people, like, so like, just why bet this game if you don't absolutely have to? And if you have Tampa Bay Bucs tickets, you got a plus 800 money line ticket. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's go Bucs. Bucs minus 4.5 here. That's what we got on the pod. I got the Falcons at the Saints. We just talked about what's going on here. Same issue here for me with the Saints, just on the Saints at home -3. The Falcons still continue to be like the weirdest hang, despite the fact that they're there in and around these other teams. It's just, you don't really know what you're going to get with this crappy team. So there was a part of me that was like, do you just take the points? But no, I mean, at the same time, who knows? It's the same thing where it might be a first half thing, no?
Yeah, a little bit, right? The thing is, there's a couple of different permutations, because I think depending on who wins and loses, obviously the AFC games are the night before. The NFC games, this is a 1:00 NFC game. So this is the first collection.
First batch.
Yeah, first batch of NFC games. You're watching Tampa Bay, right? Tampa Bay halftime, okay, they're up 20, hopefully, knock on wood, whatever. Problem is, like Chicago, Green Bay, that's why they moved that game. It's not a West Coast game. That's why they moved it to 4:00.
Exactly.
Because, the winner of this game, if they don't have it, if the winner of this game gets the division if Tampa Bay loses. Tampa Bay's up, they end up winning. The winner of this game still has
a chance. They have a chance
to bite one of the wild cards, like the 7th seed in the wild card. But that doesn't come into play because Chicago and Green Bay don't play until 4:00. So you're going to get a 60-minute effort from both of these teams. The opening line for this game, the early line for this game was 4. I grabbed Atlanta +4 because I was like, well, that's just, we're not doing that. My projection was 2, Atlanta, New Orleans. That was like based on the lines prior to last week. You watched last week's game, Atlanta in Chicago, as we talked about, like didn't seem to love the circumstances for Atlanta. Atlanta didn't. They lost comfortably to Chicago. Their rating is going to go down. The Saints, as you mentioned, kick the Buccaneers in the teeth. Their rating is going to go up. And that's how we got to 4. But that was, and then you look at it, you're like, well, it's an overreaction after one game. People bet Atlanta. This line falls right into -3, right? I think I'm with you sort of conceptually as far as like Saints -3. If you get to a point when this line is at 3, right? Because push is so prevalent where the Saints win exactly by 3. It's a pretty clear sort of, there's sort of, if you grabbed like a spreadsheet or whatever and you highlighted, a row and you went to like, put that like, put one of the borders, the lines, right? And you can choose like the width of the line. And so like you can just turn, you make one black, or you can go like thicker black or thicker and thicker. This one has like, there's such a chunk. It's such a big line where this lands just on 3, right? Saints by exactly 3. That if you can have Atlanta +3.5 or Atlanta +4, and if it comes back, I would want Atlanta in this game. If it stays at 3 and now you need Atlanta to win to lose by 2 or 1 or win outright, I would want New Orleans. And like that could be said all the time for games that are -3 point spreads. It's just this game specifically because of like the defenses, the offenses that we're not really all that thrilled about, right? Like the idea, I think it's a really low, a relatively low total in this game. Don't have that, quite in front of me. I'm going to look it up really quickly just so that we're on the same page here. 42. That's honestly feels a little bit high to me. I think this is probably that 17-14, 21-18, field goals all over the place type of a game. So yeah, like I'm not going to tell you to change your mind here on Saints -3. I'm just going to tell you like at 4, I thought that number was too high, and the market happened to agree, moving this number down to 3.
No, I got you. It's an interesting one for sure. Games that actually will matter will be the interesting thing flipping around here on Sunday for sure, no matter what time you're doing it at, to be honest, because, times are tough NFL wise if you're one of these like weird hang teams. But a team that is, the Bears definitely fall into the category as a weird hang, but this is a weird opportunity for them actually, because they can play big time spoilers as they take on the Packers. You mentioned it before. This game now becomes super interesting because the Packers, they win and they're in, but if they lose, things become super spicy depending on what happened before them. So at this point, before this game though, Packers -3 is the line. I gotta be honest, even though my thing this week is start on the favorites or who it matters more for,
right.
I was so itching to take the Bears in this game.
Do it.
Just because I feel like the Bears are the team where, Justin Fields is obviously trying to play for his like spot, his career. The team's like behind him. They're fired up. The Bears would love nothing more than to ruin this for the Packers. Like, I don't know. And you're getting a full field goal.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the key here, right? Is like what happened where the Packers were deserved of a rating to get them up, up this high and, to a full 3. I mentioned like Carolina being this team that's like, yeah, we're done with the season, whatever. And the idea with throughout the league that like these guys are all playing for jobs. And it's funny that it's sort of manifested with one single person, one single player in the NFL, and that's Justin Fields, right? Because he is like the poster boy right now for like playing for my job or playing for my next job potentially, because there's a lot of like mathematical like reasons why the Bears should just take a quarterback with the first overall pick, beyond like however you feel about Caleb Williams or Drake May or hell, Michael Penix or whatever at this point. And listen, the funny thing is about the depth of the quarterback position in college right now and this draft relative to, I mean, even last year where you had sort of 4 guys, but 2 of them were like kind of project-y. And then like Bryce Young's like, is he too small? Like there's a lot of like, there's guys, we don't really love it. And the year before, where there was like literally nobody, to the point where Kenny Pickett was the only first round quarterback. And that kind of felt like the best of like a really kind of rough group.
Yeah.
This year, it's like, if the Bears traded out of 1, moved to like 7 or 10 or something like that, and drafted Michael Penix, who would be the third, 4th potentially quarterback, right? Like Caleb Williams goes number 1, Drake May goes number 2, hell, Jaden Daniels goes number 3, and the Bears get the sort of the haul that they got last year. Again, they do this again, and they get a quarterback who, there's obviously, a difference between a guy who's 6th-year college player, and that's a lot of times a sort of a downside thing, right? Where it's like, oh, that guy's like 30 years old. I'm obviously joking a little bit there, but like, Penix is like 23 or 24 years old. He's a little bit older. But if you're trying to like turn things around quick, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, okay, so you're not signing up for 18 years of a guy's career. You're signing up for like 12 or 13 like good ones, or ones that, and you're getting all this other stuff. And the point is that Fields was his 3rd year. He's only got like 2 more years essentially under his rookie contract. You're getting a 5-year rookie contract, type of a deal. And are you positive right now? And I use Penix as an example, but you can use the other 3 guys as well. Are you positive Justin Fields is better than Michael Penix? You know what I mean? I'm not sure. Like Michael Penix is awesome. Like, I've been saying it for a long time, but like, and again, you can fill in the blanks with those other guys, right? So the point is like, as much as you go, okay, well, like Justin Fields has played a lot better and the Bears look legitimately like good now, right? The defense is very good and the weapons are starting to every time you watch DJ Moore, you're like, DJ Moore is another example of a guy like, let's get a quarterback in here now who can go, right? And like I said, Penix and some of these other guys qualify. So I don't think Fields is with the team next year. They've already said the coach is coming back. If the offensive coordinator, I know people don't really like the offensive coordinator. That's a little bit rough. But the point is like, this is one of those teams that like, we're building something. And they don't have to tell Michael Penix, they don't have to tell Justin Fields that he's not part of it until like months from now.
Yeah.
Right. And so like for this week, we've got this group. We feel really good about this group. We're excited for next year. We get to knock out the Packers. Like this honestly feels very Lionsy from last year, right? Where it's like, if we can't go, they're not coming either. The only issue here is like the Packers seem to be getting like an all hands on deck type situation where it's like Christian Watson could be coming back here and some of their defensive players, Jair Alexander, like, I think he's dying to get out there for the coin toss. So he's going to be potentially back from his suspension. So, you sort of go, okay, like I can get why the Packers might get a boost in their rating. Obviously, they housed the Vikings, but you sort of wonder, was that more about the Vikings than it was about the Packers last week, right? And we'll talk about the Vikings here in a second. I can't get to 3 though. I can't do it. Like how high do we need to go for the Packers here? Because of how the Bears have increased their rating and proven that has been a sort of a good thing, like a good idea. So like just based on numbers, right? Like the Bears are about a 45. Like we're not giving them even average just yet, but like they might be a league average team. And so like that means for the Packers to be -3 here, you have to be positive that the Packers are like a definitively above average NFL team. And like it's a team that almost lost to Carolina 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. No, definitely.
So yeah, like I think your initial instinct was right. See that you've changed it over to the Bears here. But again, I have Packers, to make the playoffs here. I'm definitely I've already made a bet on the Bears to cover this number. Ideally, the Packers win by the slightest of margins and make the playoffs. But yeah, if I'm just coming off the street here, never bet a game before in my life, like Bears +3 is a bet that I think is the right side.
Yeah, super interesting stuff there for sure, as the NFC playoff picture continues to just be like, wait a second, the Seahawks are still involved here. The Seahawks are in the mix here. They are 2.5-point favorites in Arizona. Seahawks, again, needing a win to have a chance to get in, which, as you just mentioned, depends on what happens with the Packers and all that other fun stuff here.
Yeah.
But this game also going on at the same time. The Cards, I'm sitting here saying, again, I'm on the Seahawks. They need it. But the Cards, aren't they in kind of a similar position as the Bears in the sense of Kyler Murray and Justin Fields, both kind of like auditioning here for their next spot, whether it's on the team they currently are on or somewhere else in the league? So again, this is another one where I'm like, all right, Seahawks -2.5. Okay, cool. If it was 3, I'd probably be jumping to the Cardinals on this one. But either way, I'm still heavily like, ooh, Cardinals might be a pick here.
Yeah, and they certainly were when it was +3.5 and +3.
+3.5. Hey, yeah, I'd be right there.
Right?
2.5. I'm like, okay, Gino.
And I mean, listen, that's the case every week in the NFL, right? Is like jump on the numbers that you think are wrong when they open up on Sunday night. And when it comes to, week 18 and a lot of these games that we're going to talk about here going forward, these fake games, those are the ones. Listen, Houston and Indianapolis, that number's always going to be about pick 'em, right? Like there's no reason for that to go to like 3 unless there's some sort of midweek injury type situation. With these others where you're like, I don't know who's going to play and this, that, or whatever, right? Like those numbers are going to move. And so this Seattle one, I have like, again, from a rating perspective, I have Seattle -1 in this game. And that's not my personal ratings, right? That's point spreads up until this point. This is a Seahawks team that just lost at home to Pittsburgh, right? So like, why would Seattle get a bump from that? Arizona is going to get a bump, theoretically, from going on the road and being capable of not just beating the Eagles, doing so pretty convincingly, at least from like a box score standpoint. Like that game at halftime, I think it was around tied or certainly very close. But like the first half, and that's what I'm worried about from the Eagles from a first half bet, this week, is like the Cardinals were dominating that game. Like Kyler Murray threw a 95-yard pick 6. That wasn't really his fault. He thought, the quarterback broke off the receiver, broke off the route. And then, it was sort of just a punt at that point because, the Canadian kid, Sidney Brown catches it and weaves his way for 100 yards. It's like, they still lost that game, the Eagles did, despite getting kind of like a free, 10-point swing there in the first half. I believe it was the first half. So the Cardinals, we saw them lose and not cover against the Bears. But as you mentioned, like they're a very similar team to the Bears. And you mentioned, speaking of teams that have an interesting decision, now the difference being is that they've already given up so much money to Kyler Murray. Like there isn't a trade market in the same way that there might be a trade market for, Justin Fields. That might have them sort of stick with him a little bit longer, even though they're going to have a potentially interesting draft selection choice situation here. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they have their first round pick, right? It's funny because nobody talks about it. Everybody just assumes that Kyler's going to be back.
Yeah.
And the Bears thing is so much more sort of interesting because it's number 1 versus like, what would the Cardinals be, like 5 or 6 or something along those lines? I don't have the draft board up just yet. We're going to get to that at some point in January, but just not quite yet. But point is here is like, like what are we getting so excited about Seattle that they should have ever been 3.5, and even 2.5 feels like it's, Seattle needs the game. Problem is, it always comes back to it's week 18. You got futures bets, et cetera, et cetera. Guess who's got a Seattle Seahawks playoff, future? And the funny thing is, right, there's 45 teams that, seem to have like a chance to make the NFC playoffs here. And the Rams are somehow in a position where they're just sitting back and they don't really care. You know what I mean? It's like, why isn't there anything at stake for the Rams? How did the Rams?
It's so weird, yeah.
Right? Like, how did the Rams deserve like a feed up, a Carson Wentzing on week 18? Again, we'll get to them obviously here in a second. And so, for me, it's like, okay, I just need one. Like, obviously, I know because there's just not enough, seats at the table. I know the Packers or the Seahawks here. One of these two teams has to win. That's how I approach that chunk of those games. But I've bet on both +3 on the Bears, and I've bet 3.5 and 3 on the Cardinals.
Yeah.
That's my confidence level, right? And it's like one of the two, if one of the two wins and covers, then I lose, one bet and I lose the other bet, but I win one bet and I win the other bet and I kind of break even. That's just how I look at it, right? 2.5 is too low now for me to like advocate betting on the Cardinals. Because it's the at the same time, like the Cardinals have a lot of holes on defense, and like the Seahawks can take advantage of that, right?
Yeah.
So like I can't talk you into like Cardinals. I'm just tell you like I bet Cardinals at a better number, at a key number of 3. Like, cool. Like you're listening to this and you're going like, cool, but like what am I supposed to do? Honestly, I probably just take Seattle -2.5 at that point.
Yeah, Seattle -2.5 happens to be the bet. And as we move forward to the other NFC West rivals of said Seahawks and Cardinals, we got the Rams and the Niners. You mentioned the Rams in a position where they're starting Carson Wentz over Matthew Stafford. The Niners, the Niners are in a weird spot too, because it's kind of like, okay, well, you got it locked up, but like now we're looking at Sam Darnold's music. Is that a thing here?
That
Brock
is.
Purdy, Pro Bowler, Brock Purdy getting the rest. What is going on here? Sounds so strange. But anyways, Niners 4-point favorites at home here. And I don't know what to make of this game. Like you got two guys. This is the perfect name, as you mentioned, the fake game.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're Shanahan, you're bringing out like your Z playbook, no?
Z playbook. See, I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it like you might have the B- players.
Wait, this is hold on.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm skipping over this. So this is Carson Wentz versus Sam Darnold. That's what's going on in this game.
Yeah, man, we're living it. We're living life this weekend. This might be my favorite game of the entire like slate. Like if you said, hey, you could pick one game to like pull out of, if you could move this to London and throw it on at 9 a.m. Like take one of these, like, of the 1 o'clock and 4 o'clocks, throw it on at 9 a.m. just to get just to feel something on Sunday morning. This would be the game, man. Like I think this game's stupid and I love it so much. Part of it is because I grabbed San Francisco -3. I think it's like my biggest bet of the group.
Yeah.
Because I looked at it going, okay, and I think we've talked about this before, right? The idea, and it's kind of the same. It's not the same thing. I was going to say it's the same thing as Buffalo. It's not. The idea of like desperation. You're playing to like, make the playoffs. That's one level. Are you playing to like have a bye? That's another level. Are you playing to have a home game? That's a third level. Are you playing for the 6th or 7th seed? Right? Like that's not really you're not. I'm like, I'm going to make this tackle so that we go to Dallas instead, or we go to Detroit instead of Dallas. I'm going to make this tackle because I want to go to the playoffs. Oh, I'm going to make this tackle because I want a week off or I want a home game.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make this tackle because like I'd rather go to Dallas than Detroit, or vice versa. And we knew that Sean McVay like doesn't play anybody in the preseason. And that's what these games essentially become, especially for two teams who are going to the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Like, Jets, Patriots, like you can call that a preseason game, but it's, I would more label it an exhibition game. This is a preseason game. This is a pre-playoff season game. Yeah. Why would you ever start Matthew Stafford in this game? Exactly. Right? The guy could crumble at any moment. Why would you ever start Brock Purdy? And a guy who has been banged up the last few weeks? McCaffrey, et cetera, et cetera. But the point here is that like when you take all of these sort of elements away, and listen, we've gotten to the point, right, where like the 49ers their rating is so off the rails that like they would be like in theory like an 11-point favorite in this game. And so you're sitting here going like, man, like I would love the Rams. Like, yeah, because the Rams, like their rating has like gotten boosted up. They also struggled with the Giants last week. It's worth sort of mentioning. And we know that the 49ers rating had gotten like to a point where they were basically like not incapable of covering because they literally covered last week, but like it had gotten out of hand, right? So yeah, it would have been 11 necessarily, but it would have been probably between 7 and 10 essentially. So you're getting a discount on the 49ers fundamentally. And but then you're going to say, well, Christian McCaffrey's out and Brock Purdy's out. And I would say, okay, well, Matthew Stafford's also out. So Stafford and Purdy are probably sort of a 1-to-1 downgrade to Sam Darnold and, Carson Palmer, respectively. And then you go, okay, well, what about the McCaffrey thing? My point about the playbook thing here is I think you're getting the B- players, but you're still getting the Shanahan playbook. Like there isn't a shitty, pardon the language, there isn't a bad version of, I don't think, the 49ers playbook. There's like an A+ version, but there's not like a D.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying.
So, and if the result is Jordan Mason running these plays, as much as Christian McCaffrey's awesome because he's pass game, like all of the stuff that he does, right? He's going to turn a 5-yard run into a 65-yard run. Jordan Mason, I mean, he's a running back, right? Like the reason basically everybody other than McCaffrey in the league is essentially replaceable is because he can run through the holes, right? Like Jordan Mason can run through the holes. So I think, okay, maybe Debo doesn't play, maybe Kittle doesn't play. And again, like that's the difference between like putting together like a Super Bowl team, but like a team that can beat Carson Wentz, And again, like we talked about it with the Ravens, like there's probably a bunch of guys who are just chomping at the bit. And there's only so many guys on the 49ers roster that can sit, right? Because the roster is only so big. And so I just think you're getting like I know, again, this might sound like I'm, besmirching the good name of Brock Purdy, but like the 49ers can do it with Jimmy G. So the 49ers can do it with Sam Darnold. I don't think the Rams can do it without Matthew Stafford.
Yeah. No,
right?
that's totally fair.
And so he's, you're losing him and the number is way lower than it would have been if all things were equal. So you're getting a discount on the 49ers. And I think the more relevant players, and I would expect Cooper Kupp to probably not play much if at all in this game. The more relevant players are also, the guys with that's the whole point of the Rams, right? Is they have no depth. So like Carson Wentz comes off the street halfway through the season. And get into the Rams depth, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
If you're getting into the 49ers depth, you're probably still okay.
Yeah. And
you're getting a better number than what you would have been getting if all hands were on deck here. So I love this game. I love the 49ers in this game. Again, a lot of these week 18 games, right? Like how much do you try also has a lot to do with home versus road too.
Definitely.
Definitely. So it's like, one, everybody's playing for their career. Certainly the backup guys on the 49ers are, right? Those guys all get contracts. You look at the rest of the NFL and it's like, seventh best defender from the 49ers last year gets a big contract to go play on, blah, blah, blah team or, Houston or Miami or whatever, right? Like all these guys with coaching ties to San Francisco, they all end up on these teams because I worked with that guy in San Francisco. He didn't get a lot of playing time because San Francisco was loaded with all pro players. And these guys end up, on these teams, right? Like the Raheem Mosterts of the world, right? And it's like, yeah, okay. Like Jordan Mason might be the fourth best running back in the entire league. We just don't know it yet, right? I'm obviously sort of potentially exaggerating, but it isn't like the craziest thing anybody's ever said because Raheem Mostert just led the league in touchdowns this year, right? Exactly. So if Jordan Mason ends up on some other team next year, I might bet him to lead the league in touchdowns, if he gets certain type of a role. So. Anyway,
no, I got you.
Love San Francisco here. Yeah, I wish it was a 9:00 because it might as well be in London because I don't know that there's any home field advantage in this game other than just the concept of all these guys, these backup guys. It's like basketball, right? Role players all play better at home. We're going to get a lot of role players for the 49ers playing more minutes, more snaps. So they're going to play better at home, and I love the 49ers in this game.
Super interesting stuff there. Super interesting stuff here as well. So we got the Vikings on the road against the Detroit Lions. Lions 3.5-point favorites here. Seeding kind of matters for the Lions here as there's a world in which they can, they're kind of stuck, right?
The world involves Washington and the Giants winning.
The Giants, which
that's not a world we live in.
No, but I'm saying there's a chance.
Yeah. Right. But that probability, right, has to be built into the idea of how much they care.
Exactly. Exactly. So they're going on against the Minnesota Vikings, and the Minnesota Vikings, you mentioned them last week in terms of their kind of terrible no-show against the, shouldn't call it a no-show. They didn't play well though against the Packers. But in this one, 3.5 points. I like the 3.5 points with the Vikings just because I feel like if you're the Lions, just relax and, take it easy for the week and chill. I'm being facetious, obviously, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, it's up to 3.5. I bet Detroit -3 when it got down to -3. The number, what would the number normally be, right? I have it at, like, going into last week, I think the number would have been around 6.5.
Yep.
Probably a little bit closer to 7. That's based of obviously Detroit being a little bit undervalued against Dallas and Minnesota being overvalued against Green Bay. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I haven't really adjusted for the closing line of that being pick'em, but that was a Jaron Hall number for the Vikings. So, honestly, like, I think the number probably would be, all things being equal, would be probably closer to like 7.5 or 8. Mm-hmm. Now it's only 3. And again, it's on the idea that, like, it's on the two ideas. One, Detroit doesn't need it, isn't likely to need it, and that the Vikings do need it. Cool for the Vikings. They don't have the horses. They don't have the quarterback.
Yeah.
For this to matter, right?
Yeah. Mullins is starting, right? I think I saw that.
Yeah, which, like, adds an element of variance to things. But, like, Chris Collinsworth was always excited to watch Mullins play, and it's like, hey, he throws some interceptions sometimes. It's like, you said that, like, turnovers aren't, like, the biggest predictor of, like who wins in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you can predict who's going to turn the ball over, you just predict who wins.
Yeah.
And so, okay, let's say Jared Goff doesn't play. Guess whose music we're listening to here? We're hearing coming down the lane here. Do you remember who the backup quarterback is for the Lions?
No.
That's Teddy Bridgewater's music.
Oh, friend. Wow. Teddy Two Gloves still around, eh?
Well, and he announced this a month ago, this is his last game, or his last season.
What?
Yeah.
That's sad.
So you're getting, again, the worst case scenario is Teddy Bridgewater, long-time NFL veteran, mm-hmm. in his last chance, knock on wood, Jared Goff doesn't get hurt in the playoffs, in his last chance to play. How is that not better than, like, Nick Mullins? Bridgewater, like, one of the things is, like, no, he doesn't turn, he's like Tyrod Taylor, like, they don't turn the ball over, right? They play, pretty safe. And again, like, think about the Lions, right? Where, okay, you tell me Jahmyr Gibbs isn't going to play. Tell me David Montgomery isn't going to play. We watched the Lions last year essentially playing with, like, random running backs. We've watched them play with random running backs over the last couple of years, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's always just, there's like a white dude named Reynolds in the mix every, once in a while. And you're just like, who's that? Like, what? There's another Reynolds, but he's a receiver. Like, what? There's this guy? And, and obviously, like, from a receiver standpoint, if you didn't play Amon-Ra St. Brown, like, that's not ideal if you were, I don't know, playing a good team. But if you're playing the Vikings, like, you could probably, do without. And we're not asking him to cover a big number. We're not asking him to cover 7.5 or 8, right? We're just asking him to win. Home game, right? Does this feel like a Lions team? And I think part of the whole 2-point conversion thing with Dan Campbell last week, and, I was out with friends watching that game, and they're like, and I was like, I love it. I love the 2-point conversion. They're like, you loved it at the 7-yard line. I was like, I do. I mean, maybe only because I had, Detroit plus 5.5, and I wasn't looking for that game to go to overtime. But part of it was just like, I love that he's just like, go. No, we're going. Mm-hmm. Like, back us up 15 more yards. I imagine 15 more yards they probably kick. But, like, it's like, yeah, we're going for it. Like, we're just doing this. And, obviously they're going to feel like they got screwed off of that game last week. And again, it's Dan Campbell. Like, this team they might throw a no-show on the road every once in a while. I find it hard to believe that they just don't care. Yeah. Again, with Teddy Bridgewater playing his last game, from everything I understand, like, Teddy Bridgewater is a very likable person, a guy that, like, those guys will, sort of battle for. And again, there's only so many guys that can sit in these games, right? And by the, you can say, okay, well, a bunch of offensive linemen for the Lions aren't going to play. They've had enough injuries over the course of this season where their backup linemen have played, a fair amount, right? So it isn't just like, oh, this unit's been together for every snap this season and like 3 guys are going to be out. So it's like, how many guys being out is really going to make a difference here? And like, none of the quarterbacks for the Vikings, outside of like Mullins doing crazy bleep, but that's going to be mitigated by the fact that his crazy stuff ends up screwing them.
Yeah.
2, 3, 4 times a game. And by the way, like when they lost that game to Cincinnati, and like I said, they played well against Detroit, and I think that's one of the reasons why people are kind of into the idea that they could play well again. I kind of thought their season ended when they lost that game against Cincinnati, right? When they blew that game, that was just kind of it. Now, they had a bit of a last dying breath, if you will, against the Lions, playing well in that game. But think about it this way, man. That game was that closed -2.5, but it was -3 for Detroit all week. Now it's -3.5 at home. So again, like whatever way you want to slice it, whether it's like thinking that Detroit would be over 7 in this game, with all things being equal, or comparing it to the point spread from 2 weeks ago, you're getting a discount on the Lions. And I would just say, like, I don't think that that's necessary. Like, why are we getting a discount on the Lions here? A team that I think shows up. And I think that's why once it got down to -3, the market was like, yeah, I'll bet the Lions at -3. 3.5, still good for me.
No, I hear you. I got you. Pick has been changed to Lions -3.5. We keep things going here as we got a couple more games here to speed through. We got the Browns at the Bengals, and the Bengals are 7-point favorites. I can't believe I wrote this down. I had to write it down because I needed it to make more sense. But Joe Flacco and the 11-5 Cleveland Browns don't have anything to play for because they're in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Wow. 7 points is a lot though. And starting point. I wait, why am I on Cincinnati here? I don't understand. I'm changing that right now immediately. Give me the Browns +7 in this one.
I think it's a referendum on how you feel about PJ Walker, I think, in this game, because
probably.
So full disclosure, like speaking of that, to a lesser extent, the San Francisco game, when this game opened, it opened like 3.5 in like one place and then went to 4 very quickly. I grabbed all the 4 that I could stomach with the idea that we're not getting Joe Flacco. We're not getting anybody of any sort of relevance. Myles Garrett, I imagine. Mm-hmm. Denzel Ward, I imagine, right? Like basically Amari Cooper, right? You're not getting any of those guys. So I'm going to like the home team who's playing in their last game. Jake Browning is going to play in this game. He's still trying. I don't know if Jamar Chase is necessarily going to play, but when you take away that many players off the Browns, it's one thing when it's like, talk about the Lions infrastructure, the 49ers infrastructure. I'm not trashing the Browns infrastructure, but those teams are also playing at home, right? Yeah. This is one where like they can show up, they can play the like C roster. We talk about the idea of like depth. The Browns have used up their depth, right? Yeah. Like that's how we got to Joe Flacco. That's like Nick Chubb's not, walking through that door, right? We've already got, we've sort of skimmed the top already off of the Browns. So yeah, like if the Browns showed up for this game, got absolutely waxed, never scored a point, like would you be all that surprised? Like no, of course you would. Maybe some guys don't play for the Bengals, but like speaking of contracts, right? Like Joe Mixon probably not going to be a Bengal next year. Yeah. Obviously Jamar Chase injured. That's a little bit of a different story necessarily, but T Higgins, that's an interesting one. Like he's a free agent, and probably not going to be back with the Bengals next year. Do you risk it just to play one more game? Probably not, but. Again, like I think who cares less here is the Browns. Now, the problem here is this number's been bet up to 7, and I'm talking about this like it's 4, right? Like my conviction on the Bengals is at -4.
Yeah.
I don't have the same conviction at 7. Why would I have the same conviction at 7? It's just more like in theory, as far as like every one of these games, if we went and looked back, especially if the Browns like won a playoff game, which I think they're very live to do, especially as a 5 seed.
Yep.
Going to the AFC South champion. We look back and like, oh, the Browns like made the conference championship last year. And like, oh yeah, like let's look at they won this game. Then week 18, they lost 20-3 to the Bengals. And it's like, oh yeah, they didn't need that game. I think 20-3 is in play here, right? So like 7, like I'm not betting 7 because I've already bet 4.
Yeah.
Right. But like I can't. This is one where, like, if you bet Cleveland, even at, like, the good number, there's a chance you watch this game and you're just like, oh, like, I'm watching a football game where one team like could not possibly care less. And like, how do you want to feel about yourself at that point in time? Right. So
no, totally with you.
I just sort of advocate a teaser in week 18. But how is -7 not down to -1 not like a really good idea, I think, in this game? And then maybe you grab like one of these games that we think is going to be close. Just kind of skimming through because I actually have not bet a teaser. Or honestly, one of the games that we might get to here. I mean, that's a bit weird. Well, you know, I mean, there's a couple of honestly, even I was gonna say Dallas maybe down to 7 if it's 13. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud at this point. But the point is like this would be maybe a teaser leg for me because I think that's how sort of certain I think the Bengals are of winning this game.
Yeah.
I'm not dying to lay 7.
No, I totally got you, man. I totally got you. I'm not dying to lay anything involving this game, but hey, I signed up for this, so I have to make a pick between the Jets and the Pats. Pats at home and favored by 2 points here. I'm just thinking like Belichick, is he not trying? You know, is that like a real thing? I can't see Belichick doing that. And the Jets are just a gong show. I don't know. So give me the Patriots here -2.5 or -2. Sorry. Whoa. I'm trying to add extra points here.
I grabbed the Patriots. It was like -1.5. If it got to 3, I'd have to have a conversation with myself about coming back on the Jets. This is the one that I was thinking, well, if it was 2.5, would you tease it up to 8.5? Just because like it feels like it's going to be a really low scoring, kind of grimy type of a game. This is Bill Belichick's last game. He never loses to the Jets, right? This is the one game. I mean, listen, it behooves the Patriots to lose this game for draft position. It also did 2 weeks ago against Denver.
Exactly.
And they won the game anyway. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, I can't see him, especially if it is his last game, like intentionally putting the team in a position to lose the game. There's also the element of like, okay, we've seen what we've seen out of Trevor Siemian. Is Zach Wilson going to play in this game?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, are we doing a third, like Zach Wilson's back type of a situation? Like that seems far-fetched. So yeah, maybe not a teaser with the Jets here because like, listen, they could get shut out in this game by the Patriots and they could get shut out and the Patriots could still like, I was going to say not cover, but you'd have to physically cover this game. Not cover a teaser, you know, a teaser leg, you know, in reverse. Like the Jets could still cover a teaser leg. That's what I'm trying to say by not scoring. I mean, we saw it was last year. It was like was it 6-3? I think they had a 6-3 game in there somewhere. Yeah, this game's gross. I'm with you on the Patriots. But honestly, it's like very narrative based. You know, the idea that like people, the Jets are like, screw this, like we're done. And it, you know, probably Bill Belichick's last game at home against the team, you know, that he's owned and that he doesn't particularly like all that much. So yeah, super narrative-y, but yeah, take the Patriots.
All good. Sitting on the Patriots. Also on our next game, we got the Broncos at the Raiders. Broncos 3-point favorites on the road. Both teams are done. Two coaches, though, still highly motivated to win. Obviously, you got your man's Antonio Pierce, who's trying to get a job for next year. And we're seeing the players come out, led by Devontae Adams, talking about, hey, no, we want AP back. We want him to win. And then you got Sean Payton on the other side, as we discussed last week, where, hey, he needs to show that he made the right move here going to Stidham. So with the 3 points, though, up for grabs, I'm just taking the points with the Raiders at home here. I don't really like it, by the way.
No, I see the 3 up there. I'm like, where do I get 3? Yeah, you're gonna have to pay a little bit of juice for the 3. I'll put it this way. My point of sort of, you know, dragging my feet here. Let's see, what is 3? 3 plus 3 minus 113. Currently available right now. So that's a bet that I'm going to make. You have LV plus 3. You mean? Oh, see, no, we've got that situation. It's
what happened here? It's Raiders are favored by 3.
Yeah, it's Raiders by 3.
Listen, man, call it when stuff like that happens. You know what it is? I just call it NBA brain, man.
I didn't even realize it for a while there. I was more like obsessed with the 3 than I was about who the team was. Like when you first put that out, I was like, 3? How do I get 3? But you're right though. This morning, as a Thursday morning, like there is some pretty widely available +3s on Denver. Yeah, I mean, just fundamentally, right? Like who's Vegas to be favored by this many points, kind of against anyone, or at least anyone with a coach who they haven't quit on? Could you tell me that the Broncos?
Can I just say that I do love that my pick is literally whoever is the underdog by 3 points in this 100%. Game.
Well, and
that's pretty funny.
Honestly, and that's like mathematically viable because guess what my rating, guess what the market ratings based on point spreads that we have seen, up until this point in time, with the Raiders being minus -2.5, 3 last week against the actually, it was got up to 3.5 last week against the Colts. So whether you upgrade the Colts,
we had it at 3.5 last week.
Yeah. So I mean, like best case scenario, you're not upgrading Vegas, and Denver, by the way, won and covered last week that game.
They did.
I don't know how Las Vegas could win this game. They could win this game comfortably. Blah blah blah. But like, I don't know how you have Vegas -3 here. Like, yeah, this is Denver +3. Like. Both these teams eliminated last week. So, like, what are you going to get out of them? I think you're going to get more out of Jarrett Stidham and the Broncos because I don't think Sean Payton's going anywhere. I think this last couple of weeks has been the, like, you're either with me or you're against me sort of ploy. Now, maybe that backfires in a Week 18 game against Vegas and Vegas covers. But, like, okay, cool, Antonio Pierce, like, you want the job. But, like, I don't know. How about go for it on 4th and 2 from, like, the 45-yard line instead of, like, punting over and over again in that game against the Colts last week, right? Like, show me something that you're doing from a head coaching perspective that like would warrant me like being interested in you going forward. So that's going to be a no for me, dog, on Antonio Pierce. I mean, listen, Sean Payton, we'll see sort of how these ploys kind of work out. But yeah, man, you're going to give me a full 3 points here with two teams that I have as a pick 'em based on the estimated market ratings that we've seen from previous games. I have this game as a pick 'em, and so you're going to give me 3 with one team or the other. I'm taking it.
Yeah, basically disregard everything I said at the start of this game and just flip it to the other team in terms of, wait, this team's getting 3 points against that team. And there you go. Denver +3. We close out this week with the Chiefs at the Chargers. Chargers at home and favored by 3.5 points. Now I'm like, do I have that game right? I don't know, but I'm on the Chiefs here at +3.5. The Chiefs aren't playing anybody. Blaine Gabbert. This is a Blaine Gabbert game. As Mahomes is chilling on the sidelines. At least he can't get mad at his receivers this game. Imagine if the receivers are just making like mad catches this week.
It would be so great. Oh God, it'd be so great.
I'm on the Chiefs just because I'm always on the Chiefs +3.5. Sure, why not?
Well, normally you're on the Chiefs because Patrick Mahomes.
I know, but what am I like? Come on, like, yeah.
Listen, Sheldon Alexander has always loved Blaine Gabbert. We all know this.
Hey, former Niner, man.
Okay, like, first of all, what would the number be if all things were equal? And when I say all things are equal, that means Easton Stick, not Justin Herbert, because with all things being equal doesn't mean we can go and fix people's hands that have been broken. But if this was a, say 30-week season and we were in the middle of the season, what would the spread be? Well, we saw Buffalo was -12.5 at LA. So to say that the Chiefs would be 11.5 point favorites in this game isn't crazy, right? So now we've got a 11.5, +3, and 15 point swing.
It's a swing.
That's a swing, man. That is a swing. And the problem is, like, I can't sit here and tell you, like, it's crazy. We got to grab the Chiefs. Like, I'll put it this way. Like, it swung initially. And again, this is sort of the halfway. He hasn't been announced yet, but, like, we think type of deal where the Chargers, actually, I think this number opened. It opened Kansas City it opened Kansas City -3. That was gone like instantly, like couldn't even like hit the buttons fast enough, essentially.
Yeah.
And went to basically pick them. I mean, at that point, the writing's on the wall, right? You know where we're headed. We're headed to everybody on the Chiefs not playing. So I bet the Chargers like -1, like -115 on the money line. Now we're at, we went to 3 for the Chargers. Then we went to 3.5 for the Chargers, right? So like the idea of betting against the Chiefs based, betting against the market here is not what I would like to do, because like with these sorts of things, again, I keep referring to sort of bowl season. Anytime like a line got kind of adjusted away from like a projection, it didn't really work out. Anytime a line got like mega adjusted, it actually still worked out, right? So it'd be like, put it this way. This is a 15-point adjustment. The team that was adjusted 15 points in their direction, i.e. the Chargers here, won comfortably. So it's like, yeah, like you could sit here and tell me that the Chiefs plus 3.5 is valuable. But when we get down to a game that starts 0-0 and the Chargers only have to win by 4, and it's, Blaine Gabbert on the road with the Chiefs team that, by the way, like we talked about Ravens, we talked about 49ers. What was the thing that we liked about the Ravens and the 49ers, right? The idea that depth, they have it. And if the starters don't play, like there are guys that are capable. You made the joke, it was great about the receivers, but it's not like there's a bunch of receivers, like, second string receivers going like, man, I really just want to have, wish I had a chance. The Chiefs are like into their 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th guys, right? Like there's nobody left on the bench to like try to catch passes.
Yeah.
So like maybe they do just on like based on odds, right? Like just it's mathematically probable that they actually catch a pass. But it's not like there's more dudes that's like, like watch Green Bay last week, right? This guy Melton comes off on the field. And he's got like 150 yards, right, against the Vikings. And it's like, and I said to my wife and my buddy, I was like, they're receivers just like walking the streets, right? Like this Melton guy, like he's catching them. He's running the routes to get open. He's got 150 yards, a rookie or whatever. And like, he's going to go back to the practice squad this week because he's like the 5th, 7th, whatever guy on the Packers. And it's like how the Chiefs don't have like that dude. And again, I don't think he's particularly spectacular. He's not Jordan Mason. I'm not going to bet him to get the most touchdowns in the league next year if he ends up on a different team. It's more just like, this isn't a Chiefs offense like the 49ers, like the Ravens, that was humming. And now it's just like, all right, the only thing we're going to do is we're going to switch a couple of our best players in for some guys who are like trying super hard.
Yeah.
It's like, we're just going to replace Patrick Mahomes with like Blaine Gabbert. And like, by the way, the offense wasn't really clicking with Patrick Mahomes. Why would we think it's going to click with Blaine Gabbert? And this isn't a Chiefs team that has a bye week this year. We normally have the bye, right? Chiefs throughout the playoffs, or Kansas City throughout the playoffs. And they have next week's bye. They need to get these guys ready for next week. It is wild card Chiefs season, right?
Exactly.
And so like, this feels there's no Kelsey. This feels like no Mahomes. This feels like a bunch of the defensive guys who have been injured, like Jarius Sneed, right? Is he going to play? Is he not going to play every week? Bolton, Gay, some of these other guys who it's like, are they going to play? Or are they not going to play? Chris Jones, like, why would you play Chris Jones? We've seen what the Chiefs defense, how much him being absent, sort of what that looks like. So like the adjustment is wild here when it comes to 15 points. But the first 11.5 of those points were theoretical because the game starts 0-0.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to overcome. This isn't, it was going to be a pick 'em, but now the Chargers are 15.5 point favorites, which is the kind of thing that will happen in a bowl game when you're like, like Georgia and Florida State, right? It's like, well, if Georgia and Florida State played with all things being equal, Georgia's going to be like a 7.5 point favorite, something like that. And then it opens 14 because we know the quarterback's gone. And then everybody else leaves and it closes 23.5. But the game starts 0-0 and you go, asking Georgia to win by 24 when they don't have to win by 24. Like, that's hard. They did it anyway. They won by 60. But here, it's like we start 0-0.
Yeah.
So the first 11.5 points of that adjustment is kind of meaningless because the Chargers could score a touchdown, excuse me, on the first series. And then where are we at, right? It's like we're at Blaine Gabbert from, trailing, right? So I really like the Chargers to win this game outright. Honestly, like, I guess the point is if the Chiefs aren't into it, I don't know that the point spread matters. So I think even minus 3.5 is fine.
It's just not enough.
I'm just not going to tell you like, get out there and bet, Chargers minus 3.5, like great bet. It's more just like, don't be that worried about it because the Chiefs are going to be unrecognizable because they got to play next week.
Yeah, no, for sure. Makes total sense. And as we conclude week 18 in the NFL season, which still sounds so weird to say. Where can the people find you and get more information as the week progresses? Of course, there might be some injury updates and all that type of stuff that will affect the lines. Where can the people find you online?
Yeah, at mrustauthentic on Twitter. Everything that I write, that I can think pretty much every week, that I write gets retweeted through there. At the Score app. Everybody's got the Score app on your phone. You're checking scores. Just go over to the Bet tab. Everything that we write is in that river of information there. We're gonna have, like I said, 2 articles on the NFL, the fake games and the real games. I'm gonna write that later on today. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about here, obviously. So let's talk a little college football. Obviously, we got the national championship on Monday. We had our outstanding semifinal, caught both of the winners there with Michigan and Washington plus the points, and then got all 3 of our anytime touchdowns in the Sugar Bowl after getting one of our touchdowns, our main touchdown, anytime touchdown, I should say, in the Rose Bowl. So Monday was a super profitable day. That makes for a profitable bowl season, which takes some of the pressure off a little bit for the national championship and trying to pick the right side in that game, which we'll try to do and have that up over the weekend for everybody over at the Score.
Yeah, sounds good. And you can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Shell Alexander. Lots of stuff going on there. We got some rap stuff. We got some Toronto stuff. Lots going on. Just make sure you follow along. And we appreciate everybody watching and supporting the pod. Continue to bless us with a like and a share and a retweet and rate and review and all that other fun stuff, depending on wherever you happen to be listening. We will be back next week, of course, to talk some playoff action. How did we end up in the playoffs? I don't really know, if I'm being honest, but we are here. And as I always say, I used to pray for times like this, to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time. See ya.